you see Striketober, the fall strike season gets so big, and we forget that before all of those strikes, there were overtures and conversations.
Sure.
Right. And there were funny things that went like, we'll Stellantis. We'll just look at Stellantis with the UAW really quick.
Sure.
They're saying, oh my God, if you keep pushing for this deal, we can't pay you like this. We'll go out of business. And we need to cancel our show at the Consumer Electronic Expo because we can't afford it. Because you're striking, right? Like, well, I thought you were the most profitable car maker in the world last year.
Yeah.
I thought you did a massive stock buyback. You pocketed billions, 5 figures of billions, right? Like, I mean, like huge profits. And why now are you saying you're going out of business? And there is this frustration, and there's this sense on the worker's part. You can look books any way you want. You already do for taxes. So you have a shareholders meeting and say you made $18 billion. And then you meet with us and you say, we cannot pay you $25 an hour. It's just not going to work. Right. Like, that's tough. There has to be some good faith in that conversation. Sorry, I don't mean to dump the conversation at your doorstep while you're drinking water. I apologize.
No, it's okay. It took on my throat. I think I'm catching my stomach's cold, so I was just
coughing. No, I'm sorry.
That's all right. He just turned 4, so he does learn to cover his mouth when he sneezes and coughs. But he's had this ongoing cycle of cold, ear infection, cold for the last 3 weeks. He's fine, but so I think he's between. I'll zip up his jacket, he'll sneeze and cough on me, and then I'll remember, I have to cover my mouth, So I may have caught that. But to your point about that's right, the UAW strike, listen, my sympathy, believe it or not, are often with the striking worker, because I know I don't handle a lot of the, really the NLRB, union activities. I do more wage and hour in terms wage and hour, overtime claims, employment discrimination matters, breach of employment contract, etc. But I will say that I do know for a fact that strikes are not the first resort, right? Most workers don't want to be on strike. I mean, it could look at the writer's strike. It lasts 5 months almost, right? And they're not, getting paid, and there's a lot of stress and a lot of, people just want to be fairly compensated a lot of times. And I think that the public just assumes, or I should say a part of the public assumes that, this is how the strike goes down. The worker says, I want all of this stuff. And the employer says, I don't think we can give that to you. And the workers go, strike, strike, strike. It's not really how it goes down. And I think the same, if you draw an analogy to, quiet cutting, quiet hiring, quiet firing, and then the resultant, disgruntled employee who quits and maybe sues, maybe for discrimination, or thinks of discrimination, or, the employer that's doing this quiet hiring and thinking they're saving a buck on, but then their workers are burnt out and they leave, and they're paying more for vetting and rehiring. If you look at all of this, really, I think that, again, communication and looking at what the law requires versus what you could do as a best practice. I'm all about, telling my clients, let's talk about what your workers need. And if you can't meet them in terms of this need, can you explain why, and can you give them something else that's appealing? Because it really is a two-way street, it really is. And I think, so that's just my thoughts on this. And I anytime something is kind of clandestine and, happening with motives not being communicated, as I mentioned, people fill in the blanks, I was watching a TV show once and I was really impressed by it, where I couldn't remember the episode name, but it was an episode where there were 2 cops. One got hit by, the story was a drunk driver, clipped by a car on duty. And the partner was fuming and at the hospital, and then they bring in, I can't remember the name of the series, but they bring in, maybe someone in the comments will know what I'm talking about. They bring in the drunk driver on a gurney, and the other cop is furious and threatening him, and everyone's up in arms, and the hospital is trying to keep this, patient safe. And all this cop is thinks they want to kill this, person who's drunk, and they hit my partner. It turns out the guy wasn't drunk. He had a stroke. He was sick, and he had a stroke behind the wheel. And he was actually a Vietnam veteran, did, towards the duty, and, couldn't get health insurance, So it was a very moving where the cop comes full circle and other cops to empathize with this person. My point of the story is that, how does this relate to employment law? Well, they didn't have information, so they filled in the blanks. This person was drunk. This person was reckless. This person's, reckless decisions almost is, killing my partner who's in surgery. Someone's got to pay. And the reality was the person was driving had a stroke, and that's why they were swerving. That's why they were, coherent. That's why they hit this person. So, when you have more facts, you tend to be more compassionate towards the other person.
Yeah.
So I think if employees knew, okay, I'm not getting a raise because the company, unlike the auto workers, let's say the small company really is almost going out of business, and maybe the company out of pride didn't want to share that with the employees. But if they just did and they said, listen, but we value you, maybe we can give you, more sick time, more paid vacation, more chances to advance. Like, how can we make this work until we get back on our feet? So I think that's my only point there is, that communication and expressing appreciation and compromise are like the antidotes, early on to, companies coming to my door on the litigation side of things. It's more like, the compliance, that let's write this up, let's, renegotiate, reevaluate.
Yeah.
That makes sense, Milton?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. And context is everything. Knowing what's actually going on. You brought up the Writers Guild of America, and it occurs to me that part of that strike was actually about quiet hiring. Believe it or not. They wanted to make it so that the AI could do the first rough draft of a screenplay,
right,
and then writers would edit that for a reduced fee, a reduced share percentage. They have their points on a show, but because they're not producing the original screenplay, they receive less. So they would have had to do many, many more screenplays. They would have to edit many of them to make the same living. And also it's less creative. So they're removing parts, to your point, right? You're making the point people have certain things they want. I would assume a writer got into writing because they're creative and they enjoy the creative part of that lifestyle, right? And if you're taking that creative component away and you're taking them from being a writer to being an editor and saying, listen, you may have been able to create one creative thing every 6 months and have a very nice living. Now you must edit 10 things every 6 months, and you're going to have a reduced earnings on those 10 things. And it's not as creative, right? You've added all this quiet hiring work into their life to make the same living. And you've reduced the thing which you were giving voice to that they actually value, right? Instead of sick time, here we're talking about the creativity of their job. It's like being an architect, and then they say to you, hey, listen, you got to go work the AutoCAD table. You don't get to create your own original works anymore because of whatever, right? And like that's probably not what you signed up for when you went to learn to become an architect, So yeah, it's interesting how you brought it full circle there. And when you apply the real world to what's going on, you can see the trends are real. Like people lost hundreds of millions, maybe more, because the studios were quiet hiring.
Right. Excellent.
And that's fascinating, right? I mean, it's not Debbie doing the TPS reports. It's, oh my God, billions of dollars moved and people did not get to see the shows because of quiet hiring. And I don't know, as you explained it, it clicked in my head and I said, oh, wow.
Right. And no, I think Vince, that's an excellent point about, like the writers, like wanting, that creative, space that they went into the field for, they really went in, I think, right. So they love that to express creativity. I love the architect example. When you were saying that, I was imagining, say, like, if you or I would say, if either of us were working at a big firm, doing what we love, right? Negotiating, litigating, whatnot, right? Out there. And then, we got reassigned, like, to just research and write a bunch of articles, say for the firm's like website, or to do legal research in memos in a vacuum, I would be so miserable, right? It's just, I mean, I don't mind that doing, but I also need some variety too. And if it were the same salary, or if it were even less or more hours for less creative, less enjoyable work, I'd be frustrated and resentful. What's interesting to me is that, writers, people who become writers might have a very different way of seeing the world, the creative people out there, my hat's off to them, than the people who are, making the big bucks, C-suite executives at the studio. So the studio might not even understand, like, why is this a problem? Like you write and you edit. Well, it's all the same, isn't it? And the writer's like, no, it's not the same. And I think that's where another thing that, we need to talk about, does each party, the employer and the employee, do they understand like what motivates the other, what makes them tick? Because again, my philosophy is happy employees, valued employees, heard employees
Yeah.
who are, I understand what you're saying, have a seat at the table, have some kind of stock in the company, are less likely to be litigious employees. Even if they're let go, I've seen companies that say, we feel terrible, we just can't keep, people. And I've seen some where, you call them to task too. You say, well, I see you're clearing, $10 million this year, and I see this person makes $65,000. So what if, even if everyone at the table gave up, 10 grand a year, you'd be in fine shape. And I remember during the writer's strike, I think one of the writers, there was a post on social media, right? They're listing, right, all the, like CEOs and the high up executives at these companies making, hand over fist, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. So when they say we can't pay you, it seems very disingenuous. And makes you wonder, right? And when the company is just trying to capitalize on AI, could they have done so in a different way that kept the writers doing what they're doing? Could they have flipped that around and said, writers, you do what you do best, write original material, and maybe have the AI edit and proofread?